The following is a presentation from the Greece Historical Society. Our Town in World War II speaker series are sponsored by members of the Greece Historical Society and by the sponsors of advertisements in the newsletter. Our Town in World War II speaker series. Today, Jack Foy, recorded October 18th, 2015.
Hey, welcome all to the Greece Historical Society. We're very pleased to have Jack Foy with us this afternoon. He is one of the 12 veterans that I interviewed for our project here, Our Town, during World War II. And he was an infantryman with Patton's Third Army. And I interviewed one other combat infantryman, and they had the roughest time during the war. From the 12 that I interviewed, had some interesting but horrendous experiences. So we should feel blessed that we have Jack with us today, that he fit us into his busy social schedule. We were going to have him on October 4th, but he ended up going over to Germany. And then he just got back from talking to groups in Wisconsin. So I've heard him speak before. He's been able to speak for the King and Queen of Belgium. So a lot of you know Jack, and I know you're going to have an interesting afternoon listening to him. So let's please welcome Jack Foy.
Thank you, Marie. Well, we'll get right into it. You'll have to excuse that I have to read a lot of my talk. I just passed my 90th birthday 2 days ago, and my short-term memory has taken a walk. Sometimes if I try to do it without a little help, I'll get lost. I remember as a young boy in the early 1930s that my father would bring us downtown to see the annual Memorial Day Parade. James Hard, a Civil War veteran, was the Grand Marshal. Now, a lot of you probably remember Jim Hard. He was an old man then, but he lived to be 111 years old. He died in 1953, 55, right in there someplace. I talked with James Hard a couple of times, and he told me that he had talked with Abraham Lincoln twice. And I verified that too with his official biography. So now you can say that you talked with a man who talked with a man who talked with Abe Lincoln. There's always a connection. There are marching bands from all the high schools. Hundreds, even thousands of World War I veterans, many in their uniforms, marching straight and proud to have served their nation. One of the American Legion posts had a very spectacular uniform band with shiny silver helmets. As a child, I decided that war was certainly a very colorful, spectacular, and exciting adventure. And I envied those veterans for having such a part and such a wonderful experience. Fast forward about 10 or 12 years. I now wore a metal helmet, but not a shiny silver one.
Nobody.
I was an infantry machine gunner, part of General George Patton's famous Third Army in a foxhole just outside of Bastogne, Belgium, in what became known as the Battle of the Bulge. We were fighting to relieve the 101st Airborne Division, which was surrounded by two German armies in Bastogne. As I talk, my voice might break, or you might see a tear roll down my face as the memories come flooding back. We were just getting ready to jump off in an attack at a strong German position. The temperature is about 10 below zero, a couple of feet of snow on the ground. German artillery is blasting our position. The ground is heaving up and down with the violence of the explosions. Trees are splintering and crashing to the ground. The shrapnel is slicing into soldiers' flesh. Rifle and machine gun fire split the air. The sound is deafening and overwhelming. We are the machine gun section of what is left of an infantry company, the 87th Infantry Division, part of General George Patton's 3rd Army. Young men, hardly more than boys, most of us 18, 19, 20 years old. Alongside me was a good friend that I had trained with for over a year, Harvey Wilson. Harvey was very quiet because Harvey was dead. He was feeding ammunition into my machine gun when a German bullet took him. Within about 10 yards of our position were the bodies of 3 more of my comrades, men that I can never forget. Finn, West, and Borzio, half buried in the snow and frozen in the 10 below zero weather. An image that still serves my mind after over 70 years. There were to be many more before this war was over. My machine gun squad of 6 men was now down to 2. War was no longer a great experience or a wonderful adventure. For the most part, we were children of the 20s, citizen soldiers, draftees, and volunteers, young men, hardly more than boys. Raised during the Great Depression, we did not experience the carefree days of childhood. We watched as the worry and stress of the times wrinkled our mothers' faces. We watched as the dust storms, the stock market crash, and the breadlines humbled our fathers, impoverished our families, and dashed their hopes and dreams of the future. Summoned by the clarion call to arms, especially the sneak attack on Pearl Harbor, we came from across the land, from the farms and the factories, from our offices and schools, from the sidewalks of New York to the shores of San Francisco we came. The lines at the Army and Navy recruiting offices stretched for blocks. We raised our right hand and pledged our sacred honor to defend our country. In our youth, our hearts were touched by the flames of patriotism. Resourceful and tough and tempered as hard as steel, in the crucible of the Great Depression, these men were as tough as the times in which we were raised. These were the men who made up the fighting strength of the divisions and carried out the orders of the generals and engaged the Germans in mortal combat. Around their neck hung their dog tags and their rosaries. On their head was their steel helmet, and in their pocket next to their heart was a picture of their girl back home. The real story of the Battle of Bulge is the story of these soldiers and the intense combat action of the small units, the squads, the platoons, the companies, and the soldiers who filled their ranks. The battle was very personal for them. Concerned with the fearful and consuming task of fighting and staying alive, these men did not think of the battle in the terms of the big picture, represented by situation maps and higher headquarters. They knew only what they could see and hear in the chaos of the battle around them. They knew and understood the earth for which they fought, and the advantage of holding the high ground, and the protection of a roll in the ground or a foxhole. World War II was the most violent cataclysm that human history has ever witnessed. When it finally ended in August of 1945, it left over 60 million dead, hundreds of millions crippled, blinded, and scarred, and a legacy of atrocity so monstrous that humanity is still grappling with it. Many of us, after 70 years of silence, are finally beginning to speak out about the horrors of that war. With the 50th and 60th anniversary publicity, our children and grandchildren start to ask questions which many of us have refused to answer in earlier years. Memories that we had kept bottled up inside because it hurt too much to bring them to the surface. We then discovered that the revisionist and the politically correct crowd were busy rewriting World War II history and American history in general to suit their own agendas. World War II is hardly mentioned in many high school history books. That is why we are speaking out now, to ensure that the 400,000 Americans who died fighting that war will not be forgotten, and that the true story of World War II will be told. The Battle of the Bulge started in the early morning of December the 16th, 1944, when 5 German armies, about 500,000 men, attacked what was basically 4 American divisions, about 50,000 men, in the Ardennes area of Belgium and Luxembourg. 3 of these divisions were badly chewed up in previous fighting. This was supposed to be a quiet section where they could recuperate. The 106th Infantry Division was fresh from the States and had never been in combat before. They covered a front of about 75 to 80 miles. They were stretched pretty thin. These units were outnumbered over 10 to 1 by the massive German assault. The weather was ideal from the German point of view, snow and fog. The American Air Force was useless. The early morning stillness of the fog-shrouded forest was suddenly shattered by a thunderclap of a massive artillery barrage landing on the Americans. The onslaught had begun. They were dry-mouthed, and their guts churned with fear as masses of German troopers dressed in greatcoats emerged through the veil of the early morning fog and mist and charged toward them like men possessed. Low in their foxholes, the GIs prayed to the Lord and opened fire with their rifles and machine guns at the overwhelming Nazi assault. We knew the feeling of utter exhaustion, the inability of a soldier's flesh and blood to continue on. Yet, we must continue or die. We knew firsthand the violent pounding of the heart, the cold sweat, the trembling of the body, and the stark terror that mortal combat brings. It was a hell that had to be endured, and we endured it. There is no way to convey to you the terror and agony of frontline infantry combat. To survive the violent pounding of an artillery barrage, seeing your friends blown to bits, and then get ready for the Nazi tank and infantry attack you know is coming. Living through an artillery barrage is an unimaginable horror. Dozens of German shells raining down on us, and there's nothing you can do but hug the ground, pray, and bear it. The frontline infantryman's concern is with death, not life, with destruction, not construction. The ultimate destruction is killing another human being. That's something we had to do every day. Even nature was our enemy, with often bitterly cold, 10 below zero weather. The ground was frozen solid. The skies were gray, the days were short, with daylight at 8 and darkness by 4. The nights were long and frigid, and snow knee-deep covered the ground. GIs, their bodies numb, were blue-lipped and chilled to the bone. Only a very few of us had proper winter clothing. Frozen feet were a big problem. We very rarely had a chance to be inside a house. We were outside in the zero weather 24 hours a day, day after day, without relief. That's not quite true. We captured an old monastery just outside of Bastogne. And our company commander decided we're going to try to get some of the guys inside the monastery where it was a little bit drier. It was almost as cold inside there as it was outside, but at least you're out of the snow. So we sent about half the company inside. But I stayed outside on my machine gun. Then about 3 or 4 hours later, a couple guys came from the monastery, came out, relieved me on the gun, and I went inside looking for a place to lay down. And it was one of those nights that was completely black. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. I felt my way through a door in the monastery, and going down a hall, I felt a door, I went into a room, felt a big wooden box. I put my hand in the box, it was filled with straw. Boy, this is for me. I climbed in there and pulled the straw over me and went to sleep like a baby. Well, woke up a couple hours later when it started getting light. And where the hell am I? I sat up, I looked to my right, there's another box there, just like the box that I was in. Only this one had a dead monk in it. I looked to my left, another box, just like mine, only this one had a dead German soldier in it. Seems I had spent the night in a coffin. But it was comfortable, quiet there.
Never gets old.
Nights range from 0 degrees and even lower. Men without shelter either stayed awake, stamping their feet through the long night, or they might be able to get a couple minutes sleep in a foxhole wrapped in a blanket. Most of the infantrymen and combat engineers were involved in combat and fighting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without relief, except for an occasional day when we were pulled out to repair, replace our weapons, and maybe get a couple hours rest. When the chips were down and the situation was desperate, the American soldiers stood up to be counted. It may be hard to believe, but I was once young and tough. These are the soldiers who, when their officers and sergeants lay dead and frozen stiff, they held the enemy at bay and drove him back in the days when the heavens were falling and the battlefield was in flames, with all the fire and noise humanly possible for over 1 million warriors to create. For a brief moment in history, these men held our nation's destiny in their hands. We did not fail. The assault pushed the defending Americans back, but they made the Germans pay dearly for every inch of ground that they gained. Not able to stop the powerful German advance, they really slowed it down, mostly by stubborn defenses of villages and crossroads. The engineers blew up bridges, many times in the face of advancing Nazi tanks. The heroic defense of Bastogne in the south and St. Vith in the north really followed up the Nazi plans. It gave time for General Patton's Third Army to disengage in the Czar section of France and Germany and attack the southern flank of the developing Bulge. By Christmas Day, the Germans had advanced about 60 miles. The weather had turned even colder. In many places, up to 15, 20 degrees below zero, and heavy snow and ice made travel difficult and sometimes impossible. Back home in America, Western Union telegraph lines hummed with these dreaded messages. I talk a lot at schools. I have to tell them what Western Union telegraph lines are. They don't have the slightest idea. Western Union telegraph lines hummed with those dreaded messages. The Secretary of War regrets to inform you, your son, your father, your brother was killed or wounded in action. Bringing tears and sadness to homes across our land. Homes at that time would have a small blue flag in the front window. One star in the flag meant that a person from that house was in the service. A star was added for each person. My home had 4 stars, my 3 brothers and myself. Very few streets in our nation did not have at least one home with a gold star flag in the front window, meaning that a father, a son, a brother was killed in action. Our Army suffered an average of 500 men killed and 1,000 men wounded every day for the over 6 weeks that the Bulge lasted. And that was just in the Bulge area, not the rest of Europe or the Pacific. Almost everyone in our nation was involved in World War II to some degree. The fighting sometimes got down to hand with knives, pistols, and bayonets. This type of fighting was completely different from what we were used to. Shooting a man with a rifle or a machine gun 20, 50, 100 yards away was one thing. But sticking a knife in a Nazi or shooting him from a couple feet away and having his blood spatter on you was completely different. You knew that you had killed or wounded a real man, not just some object a distance away that could be very impersonal. I'm a small man, but I was a tiger then. How I ever survived that slaughter and kept my sanity, I will never know. Perhaps it was mostly because we were only about 19 years old and really didn't comprehend what we had done. That I had a strong faith in God and in my Catholic faith certainly helped, although much of what we did was completely alien to those teachings. That I lived or died in those woods seemed to be a matter of luck and my own refusal to give in. Some men went to pieces at the sheer horror of it. The killing was the worst. Every day, one or more of us would be killed, and every day we would kill Germans. After a while, you become almost numb to it. You could dwell on it and thought about it, you'd probably go crazy. One of the worst things was that even a fairly minor wound could be fatal. The temperature was still down well below zero, and if someone was immobilized, they would often freeze to death before help could get to them. We would often see a wounded man crawling to the rear, anything to keep moving. We had trained medics with us, but they could only do so much. And of course, we didn't have helicopters to evacuate the wounded. They hadn't been invented yet. We are the warriors of the greatest generation, a generation that is taking their final curtain calls and soon will be leaving this stage of life. We are yesterday's heroes. We were soldiers once and young, the vibrant youth of that time, men who were on that terrible battlefield 70 years ago. 7 decades have passed since those terrible days when we endured the mud of the Tsar, the bitter cold snow and ice of the Ardennes, the dank cellars along the Rhine River, the terrible artillery barrages, the constant fighting and killing. We were miserable and cold and exhausted, and most of the time we were scared to death. But we were young and strong then, possessing the marvelous resiliency of youth, and for all the misery and fear and hating in every moment of it, the war was a great, if always terrifying, adventure. Not a man among us would want to go through it again, but we were all proud to have been so severely tested and found adequate. When history calls the roll of heroes, these warriors have earned the right to stand shoulder to shoulder with their forebears from Valley Forge, Gettysburg, and the trenches of the Marne in France. The only regret is for all our friends who never returned. I was very fortunate. One of 10 or 12 men in my infantry company of 200 men to return in one piece. When men are in combat, the inevitability of it takes over. They are there. There's nothing they can do about it. So we accept it. They become callous to the smell of death, the bodies, the destruction, the killing, and the danger. Enemy bodies and wounded don't affect us. In the middle of January 1945, we met units from the 1st Army coming from the north. It then took about another 2 weeks of bloody, brutal fighting to push the Nazis back to the German border where the Bulge started. This was the worst fighting of the war. The Germans were protecting their own homeland now, and they fought like tigers. This was some of the toughest fighting of the war. The Battle of the Bulge lasted about 6 weeks until early February 1945. More than 1 million men participated in this battle, but 500,000 on both sides were pretty evenly matched. It was to become the greatest and bloodiest battle ever fought in the history of the United States Army. But the cost of victory was high. There in the Ardennes, on that cold, brutal field of battle, 19,000 young Americans answered the Angel's trumpet call and had their rendezvous with death. Most of them were heroes. Their valor in most cases died unrecognized with them in the field of battle. their legacy, victory. Victory in the greatest battle ever fought by the United States Army. Purple Hearts were awarded by the thousands. The bleeding wounds of 69,000 young Americans stained the snow and left that red badge of courage on that blood-soaked field of battle. The Battle of the Bulge cost the American Army about 90,000 casualties, about 19,000 that killed in action, 20,000 taken prisoner, and about 50,000 wounded. The infantry, the man with the rifle on the front line, we made up only about 8% of the Army, but we took more than 80% of the casualties, dead and wounded. For each man with a rifle on the front lines, there were about 14 to 15 men in support, all the way back to the coast of France. This is not to say that the others did not do a valuable and dangerous job, but none made the same sacrifice that the frontline infantryman did. None. Take a little drink. When we left the Bulge, I left many friends there. Our machine gun section, which started with 12 men, was now down to 4. We had 5 killed and 3 badly wounded. Our company was badly decimated, down to about 40 men left from 200. We continued our fight through the Siegfried Line, amphibious assaults across the Moselle and then the Rhine rivers. We then began to liberate concentration camps and prisoner of war camps. And then we continued under the lash of General George Patton, all the way across Germany to Czechoslovakia, where we met the Russian army. The war in Europe ended May the 8th, 1945, almost 70 years ago. The war may have ended 70 years ago, but for us, the soldiers who fought in that war and the families of those who died in that conflict, it will never end. There is a closeness and a special bond between men who have faced death together in combat that is impossible to achieve. I have seen scenes of almost unimaginable horror and scenes of unimaginable valor and bravery. Many of us still hear the artillery barrages, the screams of the wounded, the machine guns and rifles firing when it all comes back to us in the quiet of the night. Some wait for the comforting arms of their wife to shield them from the memories, but she too is gone. We still see the destroyed tanks burned black, standing in the snow looking like great dead animals. Hundreds of black artillery craters pockmarking the snow-covered fields. And the most horrifying, the snow-covered mounds. Once men, our comrades, dotting the landscape, many with frozen arms and legs raised aloft through the snow, seemingly begging us not to forget them. The families of these men still see the boy making his first communion, riding his bike around the block, playing ball, waving his last goodbyes from the train in his olive drab army uniform. And the final memory, the prayers, the rifle fire salute, and the final taps as he is laid to rest. What we did, what we experienced, represents the love of our country, the love of our religious faith, the love of our fellow citizens, and our love of freedom. We saw what a lack of love and a lack of freedom could do. We saw the concentration camps and the prisoner of war camps. I was in Buchenwald concentration camp, one of the largest. I saw the bodies stacked like cordwood. Bodies were still being burned in the ovens when we broke down the gates. We saw the inmates like starved skeletons too weak to move. We saw the bodies of hundreds of inmates machine gunned by the SS troopers before they ran off. we saw the vile inhumanity of man against man. Most combat infantrymen thought the Army was boring, unfeeling, and chicken, and they hated it. They found combat to be ugliness, destruction, and death, and they hated it. Anything was better than the blood and the carnage, the grime and the filth. Anything, that is, except letting down their buddies. It's good to be reminded that there were and there still are such men who are willing to lay down their lives for their country, for their families, and for their comrades. Look at those young heroes in Iraq and Afghanistan. Stephen Ambrose, an old historian, said, "We sometimes forget that you can manufacture weapons and you can purchase ammunition, but you can't buy valor and you can't pull heroes off an assembly line." Women in the service? No problem. We had them back then too. Nurses, Army, WWII, Navy, Women Marines, Coast Guard. They mostly had rear echelon jobs, none in the combat units. Although some got into dangerous positions and many were killed. We were naive enough to believe that women are special and deserve respect and protection, not put in the front line with a rifle, as the radical feminists and some of our political leaders want to do. I sent a letter to the Democrat and Chronicle, this was 2 or 3 years ago, I guess it was, wondering if a woman could survive the conditions we had in the Bulge. Oh, you should have seen the letters I got back from them. They tried to tear my head off. We weren't seeing clothes from about Thanksgiving Day, I guess, till the middle of March, from the skin out. I don't know many women who could do that. Today, our armed forces and our nation face what might be the most determined foe we have ever engaged. The heart of our country has been struck as it has never been struck before. Our troops are fighting a determined enemy in the Mideast. In our own nation, we are fighting an enemy we cannot see and do not know. They are using our own kindness and openness to attack us. I was once asked by a reporter about censorship of the news media during World War II. He was surprised when I said that although there was official censorship, they were mostly self-censored. They simply did not report anything that might harm the war effort. In contrast to the media of today, the mainstream media, they were on our side. Most of the media today downplay the victories and the good that our troops do. But if one GI screws up, it makes the headlines for weeks. John Stuart Mills, an English statesman, once said, "War is an ugly thing, but not the ugliest of things. The decayed and degraded sense of moral and patriotic feelings that thinks that nothing is worth fighting for is much worse. A man who has nothing for which he is willing to fight, nothing which is more important than his own personal safety, is a miserable creature and has no chance of being free, unless made and kept so by the exertion of men better than himself." Tears still well in my eyes, remember all the friends that I lost in the fields, the towns, and the cities of Europe. Not only on Memorial Day or Veterans Day, but many times every day. Why them and not me? Did someone else take the bullet intended for me? I got hit 3 times, but only very minor flesh wounds. I only know that God took them at 18, 19, 20 years of age, and has allowed me to reach my 90th year. I thank Him for it every day. Were you a hero in the war, Poppy? My grandchildren used to ask. I usually answer what seems to have become a stock answer for infantrymen. No, but I was in a company of heroes. With duty done, the rifle stacked and the colors furled, their dreams turned to the journey home, the harbor lights of New York, and the girl they left behind. Their places in history is secured as the greatest generation. the generation is saved, the sum of all things we hold dear. And all this for the love of their country, their families, their religion, and the meager play of a soldier. Ask yourself now with heads bowed, from where, O God, came such men as these? The warriors of the so-called greatest generation. A generation that's taken their final curtain calls of about 1,000 men a day, are answering their final bugle call, and soon we all will have left. This country was truly blessed. The Ardennes woods are silent now. The battle smoke is fled. 60 years and 10 have passed. Now only memories and the dead. Thank you. May God bless you. May God bless America. Thank you. Sometimes I can breeze through it, other times it gets real hard. Questions? Now you gotta have some questions. Yes, young lady.
I'm curious, I know you were head of the group for the Bulge gentleman, and I'd spoken to you a few years ago, and I'm wondering how many are left on that list?
I started out with 99 on our original list. I'm down to about 12 or 13 now, and out of that only, well, perhaps 6 or 7 are mobile. But some are nursing homes or something like that. I'm the baby of the group, and I just turned 90.
Well, how old is the oldest one that's still,
What's that?
how old is the oldest gentleman that's still
Well, we still got a couple that are still going. They're, let's see, Tom Hope is 96, 97. Got three of them, I guess, are in 92, 93.
Do you go to the honor flight very often when they come
Yes, I try to get every return. I give a talk every once in a while at the return. If any of you haven't seen the honor flight return, I guarantee you'll be crying. And you're watching those little men get back through the gate. It's the welcome that we never received. We were never welcomed home. I came home at probably midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, the old New York Central station there on Central Avenue. It was dark, and my brother came and picked me up. It was funny, I called from New York after my ship landed there. I told my mother to get my brother Ed, who was a priest, come and pick me up. Well, that was kind of the wrong thing to do, I think. She thought, oh my God, he's coming home without legs. That's why I wanted my brother to pick me up. I didn't want them at the station. But it worked out quite well. More questions?
I've heard that it took Patton's army quite a while to get there to the Bulge. Do you know why?
It was 150 miles away. We got there in 2 days. 4th Armored Division, which was the first one, was breaking through the walls of German surrounding Bastogne within 3 days. It was pretty quick. When you talk about moving, about 100,000 men over icy back roads, we made pretty good time.
Well, I was reading Bill O'Reilly's Killing
Yeah.
Patton, and I read where they were depriving Patton of gasoline.
That was later. That was later in the war when they were trying to slow them down. They were trying to slow us down. We were going too fast. So they started cutting our gasoline for the tanks.
Yes, I've seen a number of pictures from the Battle of Bulge, and it looked like a lot of the GIs were wearing field jackets. True?
Mm-hmm. That's what we had at 10 below zero weather. Yeah. Long underwear on. We tried to have at least 2 pairs of pants, one over the top of the other. And also we used the tricks of the old hobos that we knew in our youth. Stuffed newspapers inside our shirts. But we lost more people, I think, from frozen feet than anything else. Even more than the German bullets, I think. And then frozen feet were terrible. Your feet would start getting black, then you start to rot. It wasn't very pleasant.
Did you have boots to wear over your shoes, or?
No, we had regular GI shoes. They did have some nice boots like those you see in the Yellow Bean catalog. All the soldiers in the rear were wearing them. They snatched them off the lines before they got up to us. We didn't have them until about the 1st of February they finally got up to us. But everybody in the rear was wearing them for a month before that, but we didn't have them. Life isn't just fair. I got some pictures here that here, you pass those back to me. I've been lucky to get back to Europe. I've been back to Europe 4 times in the past few years. Pass one back. Pass one back. Pass one back. I've been fortunate enough to get back to Europe 4 times in the past couple of years. The last time was just a few weeks ago. I went to Berlin, Nuremberg, Dresden, Germany. Where was I in the Sound of Music country there near Salzburg, at the top of the mountain where Hitler had his big famous lookout, the Eagle's Nest, I believe he called it.
Got to go to Oktoberfest.
Huh?
Got to go to Oktoberfest.
Yes, I went to the Hofbrau. It's not always great.
Oktoberfest.
And we had one thing that kind of surprised me because I'd never seen it before. We went to a lot of Jewish museums that groups had set up all over in Berlin, and in fact each city we went to, they all had a Jewish museum. And they have pictures all over the concentration camp. In Buchenwald, we had seen the worst horrors of war. These guys around me were breaking down crying, seeing the condition of these people. There's just skin and bones, and you've seen those pictures of them in their striped pajamas, I guess you call them. And the ovens were still going in Buchenwald. When we broke the gates down, they were still burning them in the ovens. And we had captured about 50 or 60 German SS troopers just before we got to the camp. And we discovered that they were the guards from the camp who were running away. Well, we didn't know quite what to do with them. So we let them go. We let them go in the middle of the camp. The prisoners knew what to do with them. They took care of them in short order. So that was, see a picture there of myself with a woman and a man. That's the king and queen of Belgium. We were in we're having a small parade in the city of Bastogne. They asked us to march in the parade. Well, there weren't very many GIs there. Even the 70th anniversary, I mean, they all had to be 90 years old. You could be there. So anyway, about a dozen of us, there were only maybe 20 guys there, and about a dozen of us said, we'll march in the parade. So there's a Belgian band, a Belgian Army unit, then an American Army unit, then us, and then Belgium, what do you call it, resistance fighters or whatever, back during the wartime. We got to the end of the parade, and what's called now McCall Square, which is named after General McCall, the 101st. And there's the King and Queen of Belgium waiting to greet us. And they talk, they're standing talking just like we're talking with the guy next door. Where are you from? What's your name? What do you do for a living? How's your family? All this phony stuff. In fact, it was funny, they invited us to go to their castle, which was down the road a bit, to visit with their children. They wanted us to meet their kids. But about half the guys were pouring rain all the time we were there this time, which was better than 10 below zero and snow, but still it wasn't too comfortable. So we declined. But the people over there, they're rushing down the street, they're running out the road and hugging you. Well, we saved the country 70 years ago, so I can see where they would be a little bit thankful. And this group, the Greatest Generation Foundation, who sends us on these trips, I was often wondering where they got their money. I heard rumors about where it was coming from, but that's the truth. This time on the trip, there were 7 GIs and 20 millionaires. They were the people who were financing our trips over the years. And we had the greatest time with them. I had a guy that owned a 200-foot yacht, a couple helicopters. He was a billionaire. He's pushing me in a wheelchair. Because anytime we got any place where it was a long way to walk, they just stuck us all in wheelchairs. We'd be walking too far.
Hey, Jack, a question for you. Do you think the German civilians near the concentration camps knew what was going on?
Yeah, they had to. They had to. But the smell was terrific. Down in that smell, it's only 2 miles away. And the guards and all that would be going into town and leaving that. Did I tell you about the German kids?
No.
All these places we were going to that had a Russian or a Jewish exhibit, Jewish hall, or whatever you want to call it. And the walls would all be covered with pictures of inmates hanging on the wall or being beat or whatever. The Germans were very methodical. They recorded everything. And up until now, this time, I had never seen, I saw German adults in these places, every child. But this time, every place we went, there was hundreds of German kids. Most of them were, I would say about, maybe about the 10th grade level in school. And you're herding through these places, and there's guys explaining just whatever one of them was. And I just see those kids. My grandpa did that. But they're, up until now, they've still been hiding it. Even the kids coming up. We never told them all the things that actually went on. It's just stories. They know
Question, did you ever meet General Patton?
I met him twice.
And what was General Patton?
The first time was up in just outside of Bastogne someplace. We were just getting ready to jump off in his hat. And you never see anybody above the rank of captain any place near the front. I don't blame him. If I had a colonel's leash on my shoulder, I wouldn't be up there either. But all of a sudden, this Jeep come flying up and skidded to a stop right in back of us. We were only, from here to the road, perhaps, away from the Germans. It was General Patton himself. And he jumps up on the hood of his Jeep, and he's screaming at us, "Kill the SOBs! Kill the SOBs!" I saw him another time in a concentration camp. We liberated, I can't remember the name of it, near Frankfurt in Germany, just across the Rhine River a short distance. But anyway, That was the first concentration camp that any of us had ever saw. We had no inkling of such a thing. We didn't know what it was. I was maybe the 10th guy or so through the gate, and just completely shocked. You couldn't find words to describe it. Well, he sent somebody back to regimental headquarters, and one of our colonel comes up, and as soon as he sees it, he calls on back, and before long, General Patton, General Eisenhower were there. And General Patton, he went around behind one of the barracks and threw up. Even a guy as tough as he was couldn't take it. But Eisenhower then put out an order that every single American GI will go through the concentration camps. We don't want them saying later that it never happened, which some of them are still doing. It never happened, but it did happen. People couldn't do that. You think back how such orderly, efficient, supposedly intelligent people did. They did it. I was in just the other day in Nuremberg, in Germany, and I was in a hotel. It was across the river. There was a big plaza in front of the hotel, and the other side of the plaza was the railroad station. And the guy that ran the hotel told me, says, Hitler used to come on his train to the railroad station there. He'd come walk across the plaza, and he'd go upstairs to the first floor is always just what we call the second floor. You go to the first floor, overlooking the plaza there. It was the only room in the hotel that had a bay window on it. And they would take the bay window out, and he'd stand there and harangue the people for a couple hours. I said to the guy, "What room number was that?" He says, "The one right across from the elevator, room 211. I said, "That's the room I slept in 2 nights." It's not what it's proud of doing. But all those cities that are like Dresden, for instance, was completely destroyed by a huge. The British came in at night and dropped incendiary bombs on it. The Americans came the next morning with demolition bombs, and they just completely destroyed that city. But the Germans, being very methodical, they piled all the bricks up, waited for things to quiet down. They started rebuilding. They rebuilt the whole darn city almost exactly it was the way before, at least the front, all the facades on the front of all the buildings were all just looked like they're from 1386 or something, But the insides are all new and modern. So they did a nice job of it, really. Questions?
Want to learn more from the Greece Historical Society and Museum? Then click that subscribe button. Hit that bell icon to get notified when there's new content coming from the Greece Historical Society. You can visit us on the web at GreeceHistoricalSociety.org. You can find us on Facebook at Greece Historical Society. And you can stop in at the Greece Historical Society at 595 Long Pond Road.